You just turned 85.
Yeah,
You don't even look close to it.
I love you.
How do you feel?
50. Well, it lasted probably longer than it should because I was married at the time.
At 85, Smokey Robinson has lived a long life. He's traveled all around the world, played for thousands of screaming fans, and even been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. For more than 6 decades, his voice and lyrics shaped the language of love. And for the longest time, he was Motown's soft-spoken poet.
I wanted to make it something that everybody could do their own opinion as to what they loved.
Okay.
And so, cruising together.
But what if we told you that there's more to this seemingly simple man than meets the eye? What if we told you that behind his very successful image is a man plagued by unbelievable tragedies? From racism to allegations of intimate misconduct. This is the heartbreaking tragedy of Smokey Robinson. Let's get started. The boy from Detroit. Long before the life in the spotlight, the awards, or even the complicated years that would follow, Smokey Robinson was simply William Robinson Jr., a quiet boy growing up on the north end of Detroit. His world was small, but filled with siblings, cousins, neighbors, and the steady rhythm of a community that relied on one another more than it admitted. His mother, Flossie, worked hard to keep the family grounded, and his older sister, Geraldine, often stepped in as a second parent. His father, on the other hand, was present only in fragments, often drifting in and out of the household. But he wasn't an abusive man. He was simply a man working jobs that came and went, sometimes leaving for weeks or months at a time, just to make sure his family was well fed and taken care of. However, he often returned without much explanation, and for that reason, he kind of became an unreliable man, trying to stay afloat in an era when stable work for black men in Detroit was not guaranteed. Smokey grew up seeing him as someone whose intentions were better than his follow-through. A man who loved his family but couldn't fully anchor himself to them. Although he didn't know it at the time, for Smokey, his father's absence would build a void that he would spend decades trying to fill in different ways. His family life aside, Detroit in the 1940s and 50s was a city in transition. Factories hummed, migration reshaped neighborhoods, and music spilled out of porches, churches, and street corners. Smokey absorbed everything. He grew up listening to Jackie Wilson, Nolan Strong, and groups whose harmonies felt like a blueprint for the kind of beauty he wanted to create. By his early teens, he was writing his own songs and really trying to build his own identity. You see, Smokey had big dreams, and even though school wasn't the way to attain them, it was the perfect way to build a community of loyal listeners. In high school, he formed a group called the 5 Chimes, which later became the Matadors, and eventually the group that would define his early adulthood, the Miracles. They rehearsed in basements and small living rooms, borrowing microphones, hoping for a chance that felt both impossible and necessary. Smokey wrote obsessively, filling notebooks with ideas, even when he wasn't sure if any of it mattered. Then, 1957 rolled around, and everything changed when he met Berry Gordy. Meeting Berry Gordy. Berry was this much older, ambitious guy. Unlike Smokey, he understood the mechanics of the music business. And after hearing Smokey sing and looking through a notebook crowded with nearly 100 unfinished songs, Berry saw potential, raw, wide, and ready to be shaped. The two would then go on to build a partnership that would transform both of their lives. Berry became a mentor, a collaborator, and eventually a close friend. Someone who helped Smokey channel his talent into the structure of the emerging Motown sound. The Miracles released Shop Around in 1960, and it became Motown's first million-selling hit. For Smokey, it was confirmation that the quiet boy from the North End had something real to offer. Success came very quickly after that, but the foundation was built on those early years. His mother's steadiness, the absence of a consistent father figure, and the discovery that songwriting could translate everything he couldn't express out loud. By the mid-60s, Smokey was no longer just a singer. He was a writer, producer, and eventually a vice president at Motown. His lyrics shaped the identity of the label, helping define what the world would come to know as the Motown era. Still, even in those early triumphs, the seeds of future complexity were present. The pressure to create, the burden of image, and the emotional vulnerabilities that would later follow him into adulthood. Motown, success, and the quiet cracks. As Motown grew, Smokey became one of its central architects. His songwriting, gentle and poetic but grounded in everyday feeling, set him apart. He wrote not only for the Miracles, but also for artists who would become global icons. We're talking icons like The Temptations, Mary Wells, and even Marvin Gaye. In the studio, Smokey was disciplined, precise, and unusually patient. He believed in polishing every lyric until it felt effortless. These were, in fact, some of the qualities that made Smokey invaluable to Barry, who often relied on him not just as a performer, but as a stabilizing presence within the label. The rise of Motown was exhilarating, but also demanding. Recording schedules were tight, tours were constant, and success brought expectations that were difficult to navigate. Smokey was admired, but that admiration came with responsibility. He became a leader at a young age, guiding groups, mentoring new artists, and helping shape the label's evolving sound. This period was filled with accomplishment, but it also marked the beginning of a kind of exhaustion he rarely admitted. Smokey married Claudette Rogers in 1959. She was a fellow member of the Miracles and one of the earliest women in the Motown circle. Their relationship had begun in the simple, hopeful spirit of youth. Long hours rehearsing, shared ambitions, and the comfort of growing together in a world that was changing rapidly around them. They became one of Motown's beloved couples, admired for their unity and calm presence. But behind the public warmth were private strains that fame often intensified. Touring placed enormous pressure on their marriage. Claudette faced the difficulties of performing night after night, while also navigating pregnancies that often ended in heartbreak due to the physical demands of the road. Smokey struggled with the dual roles of being a rising star and a husband, trying to hold on to normalcy. Although their love was steady, the industry around them was relentless. Motown itself was a complex environment. Behind the music and the polished image were long work hours, creative disagreements, and quiet rivalries. Smokey's close relationship with Barry was a source of support, but it also tethered him to responsibilities beyond his own ambitions. As Motown expanded, so did the expectations placed on him. He became vice president at just 30, a role that brought pride, but also weight. He was now balancing administrative duties, mentoring younger artists, writing for multiple performers, and maintaining his own career, all while trying to preserve his personal life. As the 60s shifted into the early 70s, Smokey found himself stretched thin. The Miracles continued to succeed, but he was increasingly torn between the demands of leadership at Motown and his desire for a quieter, more grounded life. He began to imagine stepping away from the group, a decision that would surprise fans and reshape his trajectory. The storm behind the spotlight. By the mid-70s, the life Smokey Robinson had spent years building began to shift under the weight of hidden tensions he could no longer outrun. He was still admired, still writing, still performing, but the quiet discipline that once kept his world intact was beginning to fray. Because fame didn't simply widen opportunities, it widened emotional fault lines. And in Smokey's case, those fault lines reached into both his personal life and the Motown machine he helped create. One of the most enduring, complicated threads of this period was his relationship with Diana Ross. Their friendship had begun years earlier, long before either of them fully understood the influence Motown would one day have on American music. Working side by side, surrounded by the same pressures, the same ambitions, and the same early poverty, they found a closeness that blurred into intimacy. Smokey later acknowledged that they were romantically involved at a time when emotions were high and boundaries were loose. It was not something he spoke about publicly for decades, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for the lives everyone went on to build. But decades later, he finally opened up, sharing that while the relationship might have been taboo, it was also beautiful. Ultimately, it was Diana who decided to end things after she allegedly noticed that Smokey still really loved his first wife. The relationship was complicated further by Diana's own long-standing closeness with Barry, Motown's founder. To make matters worse, Barry was not only Diana's mentor, but eventually the father of one of her children. Naturally, tensions began to grow. And although Smokey and Barry remained brothers in a business sense, their closeness was tested as careers grew. Relationships deepened and personal choices seeped into the professional world they shared. As if that wasn't drama enough, Motown itself was changing. The label's move from Detroit to Los Angeles created a new environment, glamorous, competitive, and far removed from the family-like atmosphere where Smokey had flourished. Younger artists were arriving, expectations were shifting, and the older Motown acts found themselves adjusting to an industry becoming more commercial and less collaborative. Smokey, who once thrived on stability, now found himself caught between the label's growth and his desire for a more grounded life. These pressures mirrored what was happening at home. Claudette had spent years carrying the weight of being both Smokey's partner and his emotional anchor, even as their marriage weathered infidelity, long separations, and public demands that left little room for healing. The affair with Diana was only one piece of the story. There were other relationships, other tensions, other choices that created a growing sense of distance between them. Claudette never spoke unkindly about Smokey, but her quiet withdrawal, first from touring, then from large pieces of their shared life, revealed the strain more clearly than any public statement could. Professionally, Smokey also faced subtle feuds and disagreements within Motown as artists sought more control over their work. He was respected, but his influence sometimes created friction, especially as roles changed and new leadership emerged. The creative differences were not dramatic, but they signaled a shift in the environment he once navigated with ease. By the end of this period, Smokey was still a legend, still a pillar of Motown, but something inside him had begun to unravel. Fall, addiction, and the breaking point. By the early 80s, Smokey's life had reached a point where public admiration and private reality no longer matched. For decades, he had been steady, disciplined, soft-spoken, and deeply committed to the art of songwriting. But what if we told you that beneath that familiar composure was a man stretched thin by years of emotional strain, unresolved conflicts, and a lifestyle that never allowed him to slow down long enough to confront what was breaking inside him? Because that was exactly who he was. Smokey's marriage to Claudette had survived more than most unions in the music industry. Losses, long tours, affairs, shifting roles, and the constant demands of fame. Yet both of them knew that survival was not the same thing as harmony. By the mid-80s, their marriage had entered a quiet decline. It's why their separation in 1986 was not dramatic. It was the result of years of small fractures, misunderstandings, disappointments, and emotional distance that gradually made partnership impossible. Smokey respected Claudette deeply, but the bond they built as teenagers simply couldn't withstand the complexities of their adult lives. Unfortunately for Smokey, this period of personal loss coincided with another challenge that would soon consume him. Like many artists in the 70s and early 80s, Smokey found himself surrounded by the easy availability of substances, specifically white powder. What began as a casual presence in the social environments around him slowly grew into dependency, then into a full addiction that destabilized every part of his life. He later described those years as a haze, marked by confusion and a sense of drifting so far from himself that he barely recognized the man he had become. Addiction created a ripple effect. His health suffered, his finances weakened, and his relationships became strained. Friends noticed that he was withdrawing from the world, avoiding industry events, family gatherings, and even opportunities that once brought him joy. Smokey, who had always been known for clarity of mind and emotional softness, now struggled with mental fog and the heaviness that comes from losing control of one's own life. At the same time, Motown was undergoing major shifts. New leadership, the label's relocation to Los Angeles, and the arrival of younger artists changed the culture he once thrived in. Smokey still held respect, but the environment no longer provided the stability he depended on. His creative output slowed, and his confidence faltered. He felt like a man standing in the center of an empire he helped build but no longer recognized. Financial difficulties quietly followed. Addiction consumed resources, and the uncertainty of his career added to the strain. For the first time in decades, Smokey felt unanchored. But the turning point didn't come until a close friend who recognized the severity of his decline stepped up to remind Smokey that the life he had built was still worth reclaiming. Thankfully, he entered recovery, confronting his addiction with honesty and humility. And even though the journey was not quick or simple, it was transformative. Smokey soon leaned into spirituality, reflection, and a new kind of inner discipline that came not from ambition, but from survival. When he returned with the 1987 album One Heartbeat, it was more than an artistic revival, but evidence that he had regained something essential within himself. The calmness in his voice, the focus in his writing, and the steadiness in his public presence revealed a man who had walked through darkness and emerged with a quieter, steadier resolve. Smokey survived his breaking point, but the cost of reaching it would follow him for years. The allegations and the collapse of a legend. After his divorce in 1986, Smokey would stay single until 2002, when he tied the knot with Frances Gladney, an interior designer. The duo had originally met at a mutual friend's party and remained friends for a really long time before their romance ever kicked off. And although the two lived largely out of the public eye, the image of Smokey as a gentle voice of love and soul was about to be shaken. In May 2025, the world that had long known Smokey as a gentle voice of love and soul was jolted by a lawsuit filed by 4 women, former housekeepers, all accusing him of repeated intimate assault, forced intercourse, battery, false imprisonment, and gender-based violence. The complaint says the alleged abuses spanned from 2007 to 2024 and took place at several of his residences. Alongside the criminal accusations, the suit includes claims of labor violations, unpaid overtime, poor working conditions, and a hostile workplace environment. The women, identified in court as Jundas, describe a pattern of coercion, private summonses to bedrooms, forced intimate acts against their will, and threats designed to keep them silent. One housekeeper alleged that she was taken advantage of repeatedly over more than a decade. Another recounted being threatened with reprisals or loss of job if she resisted. The complaint says the women tolerated this for years out of fear of losing their livelihood, fear of public shame, and in some cases, fear for their immigration status. Interestingly, the lawsuit also names Frances, alleging she perpetuated a hostile work environment. According to the complaint, she was complicit. She allegedly used derogatory, ethnically charged language, screamed at workers, and refused to intervene even when aware of misconduct. The suit claims she knew of prior acts, yet allowed the abuses to continue. Almost immediately after the case was filed, law enforcement stepped in. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department confirmed it had opened a criminal investigation into the allegations, a development that transformed what began as a civil suit into a matter of potential criminal liability. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Smokey and his wife filed a sweeping countersuit for $500 million, accusing the plaintiffs of defamation, extortion, and elder abuse. The Robinsons deny any wrongdoing, presenting vacation photos, holiday gatherings, text messages, and what they describe as evidence that these former employees had, over the years, accepted gifts and financial support. In their cross-complaint, the Robinsons claim the women secretly harbored resentment and sought to enrich themselves through false allegations, despite previously enjoying what the couple describes as generous treatment. They call the accusations fabricated and frame their countersuit as necessary to protect their name, assets, and retirement security. As the legal battle escalates, the world is watching. What's even more alarming is that the initial lawsuit has expanded, as two more former employees, a woman and a man, added their own accusations. The new allegations include claims of exposure, unwanted intimate gestures, and forced touching. At present, the criminal investigation is ongoing. Whether the courts will uncover the truth or silence remains to be seen. But for many, the trauma is already real. The singer's reputation, built over decades, stands at a precipice. The lawsuits are more than legal documents. They are fractures in a myth, challenging listeners, the music industry, and the public to question what we value when we celebrate icons. What are your thoughts on Smokey? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.